Hey everyone, it's Jonathan from Motor Psychology. Welcome to the video. If you're new here, a special welcome. And also if you're a returning viewer, thank you once again for your support. It's greatly appreciated and really important for this channel as well. So in today's video, it is just going to be the removal of the transmission pan, the removal of the filter, the emptying of the transmission fluid, putting a new gasket on, and then putting the transmission fluid pan back with the bolts and then torquing them up. So it's a relatively straightforward type of procedure, but it's not necessarily the easiest as well because of the location. Stick around for the video. I hope you guys enjoy it, and let's get into it. Well, just getting ready here to do the automatic transmission pan removal, including the filter and then gasket as well. And I'm going to replace the gasket and filter. But before I do that, I need to take the pan off and see what type of filter it has. I'm pretty sure it's going to be kind of like a square or rectangle shape, but I want to take it off and have a look before I order it. So that's what I'm doing right now. And once again, I'm going to refer to this Haynes book here. And there is a section about general tune-up and routine maintenance. So this is kind of like what this is. And what I'll be doing is basically following this, the automatic transmission fluid and filter change. It gives you some step-by-step stuff, which I've already read, and I've done this before so on other vehicles, so I kind of understand what that is about. And the good thing about a book like this is it gives you things like torque specifications, which are generally hard to find. So those little screws here, or those little bolts, those things are only torqued at 8 foot-pounds. So that's nice to know. The general procedure that I'm going to be doing is removing the front and the side bolts and then just loosening the back. And that way it'll be able to tip out and drip out if there's any stuff that needs to be dripped out. So this is the transmission pan here. It's already leaking around the gasket, so that needs to be replaced anyway. So the type of transmission that this C3 has is called a Turbo Hydra-matic, or TH 350. It's not the 400, it's the 350. So basically it's a lighter type of transmission. It's got a low gear ratio for first gear, which means that it's quick to accelerate. And that's important because back in the mid-70s, these 350 engines were not super powerful. I think this has about 180 horsepower or so, maybe a bit more. But by having a transmission that is quick off the start, that gave a perception of power, which was important for Corvette owners in the time. So what I'm going to do is remove the side bolts and the rear bolts. I'm going to loosen the front by about 4 turns, and that will give me enough area that I could just kind of dip this down a little bit and drain it. So let's see how that goes. All right, so I am removing the side ones. Should be pretty straight. Super loose, which is what they're supposed to be, actually. There's one out. Another thing to note is these pans have 13 bolts on them, so that's the bolt pattern is 13. So we've got 2 out here. I'm going to move around to the one over here, which is right there. Let's get that one out. And I'm going to move around to the other side here, which let me get you guys into position. There's this one coming out. Super easy, like the other ones. Not that easy. All right, let's get this guy out. Oh, this is such an awkward spot for me. All right, got that one out. Moving on to this crazy side over here, if I can get it in. These are two on the side, which if you were sitting in the Corvette, these would be your right-hand side. That one's out. Moving on to the next one, which is up here. Let's do this one here. That's more near the front. All right, got that one out. And now moving to the top over here. That guy in there. Let's do that. Got that out. We're still looking at the back of the pan here. These are the two bolts that you have to loosen about 4 turns. So I'm going to do that now. That's 1, 2, 3, one more, 4. Same with this one. That's 1, 2, 3. Whoa! That's crazy. Major accident going on here. Okay, I loosened the back bolts enough, and then the transmission fluid started to flow out super fast. So I tightened those up, not super tight. I'm going to loosen the front, and I have my catch pan here ready to pick up the fluid that comes out. Let's give this a try here. I'm just going to loosen these guys because I know the pan is super full and I don't want it gushing out uncontrollably like it just did. I can see why people do not do this. Another thing to point out is whoever made this vehicle and didn't put a drain plug in there, you got to thank them. But you can get aftermarket ones with drain plugs in it. The old school method, they don't have any drain plugs. So as I'm loosening this, you can see the fluid kind of start to drip out, and that is exactly what I'm looking for. So something that is not like Niagara Falls, but something that is controllable. Let's loosen this a little bit more and see how it turns out. Let's see what we get. What I'm doing here is just pushing down on the top right of the pan as you're looking at the screen, just to open that gap to get some of that transmission fluid flowing out of the area there. And also I will show you later on in this video what the transmission fluid looks like. It's not terribly bad, but it just looks like it's in need of being replaced. There's no real smell to the fluid, so it's not smelling as if it's particularly burnt or anything like that. It just looks like it is time to be replaced. So it's not pure red, but it's not super brown either. So all in all, I'm glad I'm doing it at this time, and I'm going to catch anything terribly wrong sooner than later. I'll loosen that a little bit more so over here, I think. So this time I'm just going around the pan, loosening those bolts a little bit and trying to get a little bit of space between the pan and the transmission. Once I create a little bit more space, I'm going to pull down again on that corner, and that's going to increase the gap, or gently increase the gap, so that some of that fluid will start pouring out into the catch pan. And that's what you see right now. Getting a little bit of a transmission fluid rainstorm here. Yeah, it's hard to appreciate while watching on the video, but there's a lot of fluid that is dripping out, and because it's such a tight area between the bottom of the car and the ground, it really is quite noticeable when you're underneath it. But that's the nature of the job, I suppose. Yeah, so it's just a gradual process of gently, slowly loosening these bolts enough so that you increase that gap and you can push down. And remember, the bolts at the back of the transmission as it faces the differential, those aren't super tight either. Those are pretty loose, and that almost acts as a gentle hinge without actually bending any metal. So it's a slow and progressive, gradual opening of this pan, letting all that fluid out so that it's not a total mess all over the place. And you know what? That's just the way to do it. So it is what it is. I've sped this part of the video up 5 times the normal speed, and it's just a continual and progressive process of gradually loosening those bolts and getting that front of the pan further away from the transmission. And each and every time it opens up a little bit, and that allows you to dump out more of this transmission fluid. I'm just going to put it back at 5 times regular speed until I get to the part where I'm actually able to lift this pan off of the transmission. And we'll see how it goes, and then we'll get to see what the transmission fluid looks like inside and the condition of the inside of the pan. It's just a matter of loosening these bolts on a progressive level and letting the fluid drip out naturally until the flow ceases a little bit, and then I'll start opening the pan up a little bit to let more fluid out. Let's see if we can get a little bit more of this out here. I'm half expecting a great big gush to come along, but we'll see. See if I can get one more of these guys out. Not too bad. The flow was pretty much stopped. Well, not stopped completely. Getting there. Let's get this guy out here. And take this one out. All right, let's see where we're at. That's pretty good. All right, I believe I'm in a position now where I can take the two rear bolts off and then just lower this. So I'm gonna get around to doing that. I'm just here gradually loosening the two bolts at the rear. And what that does is that opens up the rear section of the pan slightly so that I'm able to open the front of the pan and lower it more. So I can progressively loosen those bolts and then have this pan lower a little bit closer so I can empty it. And a little bit of pressure on the top helps the fluid come out. And I just want to reiterate that the amount of pressure that I'm putting on here is super light and nowhere close to putting enough pressure on the metal of that pan to bend it in any shape or form. I'm just going to gently loosen the bolts a little bit more. Opens it up a little bit. Thank you, GM and Chevrolet, for not putting a drain plug on this thing. All right, I'm going to lower the pan now, if at all possible. I'm taking out the two bolts that are at the rear of this transmission pan. So I think that's bolt number 12 that I got out. And I'm going to tilt the pan a little bit more, see if I can get some fluid out. And as you can see, it's pretty easy to open this pan up pretty wide to get it out. So noticing that not too much transmission fluid is coming out, I am removing the 13th and final bolt, which in essence will be the last bolt that is keeping this pan attached to the transmission. So now that that bolt is just about out, I'll be able to get more positive control over this pan and pour out the majority of the fluid that is in this pan. So let's see how it goes. There's the last bolt that's out. Now I'm going to go up and reach that corner and slowly, with control, lower this pan. There's the majority of the fluid. I've got good control over where that fluid is flowing into. So I have a catch pan underneath, and this just allows me to easily get most of that fluid out until I'm happy with controlling that pan and removing it completely from the C3. There we go, it's pretty much done. So under here is what was inside the transmission or inside the transmission pan. This is the filter, so that has a couple nuts on it that come out, and this filter will drop out. So I'm going to do that now, and I'll also show you what the pan looks like, which is down below here. in a sec. So I'm going to take this thing out. So we're up looking into the transmission. Here's the filter here. There's a couple screws here actually, and they're just standard heads, so it should be pretty easy to get those off. Nice. Super easy. Grab this one off, and then we've got the filter off. Yuck. All right, here's the filter. And there's some plastic type of filter material, and you can see that it's actually got some stuff in it as well. There's also a couple of gaskets. There's definitely one on here which would come off. I don't know if you can see that, so I'm going to leave that on until I get the new gasket, and we'll take it from there. So there's the filter. It's important to change these things once in a while. And here's a look at the actual transmission. It actually looks pretty clean, nothing wrong with it. So here's all the stuff that we took out. The filter is over here. Once again, that is the shape, and it looks like there's a little bit of dirt on there for sure, so it was working. It doesn't look in terrible shape, but needs to be changed for sure. There are 2 of the filter screws right here, and there are 13 1 2 3 4 5 6 7 8 9 10 11 12 13 screws that go in here, so I've got those accounted for. There is the old gasket here, which looks like it's some sort of basic rubber compound, which is all right. The interesting part is a couple things, so let me bring this over. The transmission fluid itself is not too bad. It looks like this, which needs to be changed, but it's not totally burnt out, but it's definitely not that nice red color that you want to have. The more interesting thing for me is what's in the bottom of this pan here. That's what you have. It's a mixture of old transmission fluid and what looks like, you know, whoa, that's pretty gunky there. That, I bet you, is magnetic as well. Anyway, there's a lot of it. So, good thing is, it's in the pan and not circulating around the transmission. And we'll get this pan nice and cleaned up and a new gasket on it. The pan itself looks pretty good. No issues with the pan. Nice shape. So I'm going to be getting rid of this stuff and getting ready to put in the new filter, new gasket, and then put this pan back up. So I'm going to refresh the pan a little bit, which is just clean it and make sure all this stuff is out. Nice. And I'll wipe the rest up. Definitely time for the super absorbent shop towels. There took a grand total of 2 pieces of this to get most of it cleaned and looking okay. Here's some of the parts that I have for the transmission pan. So I have a gasket here, which is this one here, and it's 13 holes in there, so for the 13 screws that go in there, and it's made by Fel-Pro. So I'm most likely going to use this gasket, and I like how it comes flat, so there's no kinks in it to start off with, and I trust this brand. So I got a filter as well. I got it at Napa, and it actually comes with a gasket and a filter. So I'm just going to open it up and check that out. So in there is a more or less identical filter, which is great. And a twisted up rubber gasket, which looks more like the one that I took out, to be honest with you. I think I like the Fel-Pro one better, but we'll see. What I don't like about this is that it's already not flat, so that will take some time to sell out, but I mainly got it for the filter, and I think this package here was about $30, which is fine. And of course I'm going to need this one for sure for that, so that's perfect. And comes with some basic instructions as well. Here's the transmission pan right now. It looks in great shape. It's nice and clean inside. I'm just going to wire brush this outside to try and get rid of some of the surface rust, give it a quick clean, and then it's going to be ready to install. So I'm going to get my wire brush and attempt to get some of the surface rust off as much as possible. So I'm just using a conical shape wire brush, and I've not tried it on here, so I don't know how it's going to work. So let's give it a shot. So I've got the transmission pan all cleaned up, and any of the edges are smoothed out, should be no problem. I'm not going to use any RTV on this, and I do have an option of a couple gaskets here. This is the one that I got from Napa, which is came with this package here, and I also got the filter in that, which is great. I'm going to put that on in a sec. I'm also struggling with, I have this one here, which is a good fit as far as the holes, and then I also have the Fel-Pro one as well, and it's the same shape. So I'm probably going to use this Fel-Pro one. I like it better, and the hole patterns match up as well. So this is going to be the one that I'm going to use. And also, before I get into it, the specifications for the bolts that bolt the transmission pan on, according to this book here, is, where are we here? Torque specifications, automatic transmission pan bolts are only 8 foot-pounds. So that's what I'm going to do with those, tighten them up to 8, and let's start getting ready to get underneath the Corvette and get this job done. Let's see if there's any specific instructions for this. There's the gasket. Looks pretty good. And no specific instructions with this, so we're good. So this can be a spare. I'm not a big fan of that one. I do like this one. Just doing a final check for the holes in the right spot, and as you can see, they are. So I'm going to go with the Fel-Pro one. This is the gasket for this guy here. So let's move underneath the Corvette and quickly get this done. Here's the existing hardware. There is a total of 13 of these bolts here, which look like that. Out of the 13, there's 2 that are different, and they just look like regular bolts with a washer on it. These particular ones go on the shift linkage on the transmission. So there's 2 that are going to hold the shifting linkage onto the transmission pan, and these are the ones that have the washers on it. So I have 2 of those. These little guys are the screws that put the filter on. So I've got all the hardware. Now it's time to install it. So I'm ready to put on the filter here. I'm going to take this gasket off and just make sure that I have this same one lined up the same way. So I'm going to switch that out right now. And then stick this guy on. There we go. Now get ready to put the filter on. Putting the filter on is super easy. It's just a matter of making sure that you get the orientation lined up properly and you get the holes in the right place. Then the other challenge is keeping it in place while you insert the tiny little screws and get them in with your fingers, and then grab your screwdriver and snugly put them in. So the best way to do this is get one in. Don't tighten it up too tight. Once that's in and has enough pressure to hold the filter in place, you can grab your second screw and get that one set up to put in to the filter. So it is very straightforward, not very difficult. You just screw those in and not over tighten them, but you want to put them in so that they're snug. I don't have any torque values for that, but nevertheless, just put them in so that they're snug and the filter is not moving. Make sure the gasket is still aligned, and then you are good to go. All right, we've got the filter on. Now it's time to get the pan on. Okay, back under here, I'm gonna lift the pan up and get it done. So I've got the gasket on it and it's just sitting here and it's nice and flat, so it shouldn't be an issue. It's just a matter of getting the screws through and we'll take it from there. So you can actually stick a couple screws in through the gasket and it'll hold the gasket in place to a certain extent. All right, got a couple of screws in there holding the gasket in place, and I'm just going to go pop it up right now. Here we are back underneath here. So it's not very technically difficult. It is a little bit awkward when you have about 1.5 feet clearance to line everything up, but thankfully the gasket, and that's the most important thing at this point, is staying flat and in place. So it's just a matter for me to locate the holes in the transmission and line the screws up and finger tighten them in and go around that pan so that I can get a minimal amount of screws in the right place, and that way I can start putting the rest of them in and getting it kind of hand tightened, so that the next step would be to do the final torque values on it. So I think just about everybody is going to have these same type of issues if they are underneath their car and have minimal clearance. It's just juggling this around a little bit until you get it lined up. But like I said, it's not very difficult. Thankfully that gasket is super great quality and stays on the transmission pan perfectly. Also, just for the record, you are not supposed to use any RTV on a transmission pan gasket, not on the pan to gasket or from the gasket to the transmission. So this is one gasket that you never use any RTV. You just go with the pan, the screws or bolts, and the gasket, and you will be good to go in that area. So I'm just getting the final stuff down here, and I'll have all the bolts in before you know it, and I'll be ready to torque them down. Taking one with one of the washers, and that goes to the, oops, got that one in the wrong spot there. Let's pop that out, put it in there. Here's the second one with the washer. Get that one in and out of the way. And we'll move around the pan and get the rest of the ones in. I'm just doing them less than hand tight at this point. I still want to have some wiggle room on the pan in case I need it. Start getting these ones done around the side here. The two bolts that are used for where the transmission linkage is, those are the two bolts that have the separate washer, and if you look closely, they're also a little bit longer than the other 11. So it's important that you stick those two bolts with the washers specifically on the transmission linkage area. You can see there's a metal bracket for the linkage, and that's why the bolts are longer, so that you can get a full length of the bolt to cover the bracket and then into the transmission. So there we are right now. The screws are in. This is still loose. I'm going to tighten it up, and once again it is 8 foot-pounds. I'll have to say those Fel-Pro gaskets are really easy to work with, and if they stop the oil or the transmission fluid, even better. So I'm just going to wind this up a little bit. So the recommended way of doing this is not to torque them all down on one side, but kind of alternate. So tighten, 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 tighten. So do a crisscross pattern. So let's start with this one. And I'm just going to do them basically just a little bit tighter than finger tight. So here's that one. I'll crisscross over here and do the one on this side here. All right, more or less hand tightened. Now I'm going to come over to this one here. Let's do that one in the corner. we go. And then I'm going to come up and do this one here in this corner. Hand tighten only, or a little bit stronger. Now I'm going to go back into the other corner here. Get this one at the end here. Okay, just going around the pan here. We can do this one. That one's hand tight. This guy here. Hand tight on that one, and then over to the top. Come over and do this one. I decided to show the entire process of tightening these bolts up on the transmission pan because it's really part of the unknown process of replacing a gasket and a filter on a transmission pan. So these are some of the critical areas where if they're not done correctly, you're going to either overstress your pan or you're going to compress your gasket too much. So you want to take your time and you want to alternate what bolts you're doing and try and do an opposing pattern. Like in my case, I did a crisscross pattern and I just tightened them up very lightly. The final adjustment is going to be done with the torque wrench, and that's where I'm going next on this video. So all of them are on, and it's just going to be about torquing them down, and that's 8 foot-pounds. So I'm going to get my torque wrench ready and then come in and torque them. And I'm going to use the same kind of crisscross pattern as well. Here is the torque wrench that is required to put in something like 8 foot-pounds. So my other torque wrenches started at 20 and 30 foot-pounds. So this one is good for doing super light stuff. And it's only a 3/8 drive, but as far as the ruler to calibrate it is super fine. So I've already got it set up for 8, which is 7.5 here, and then turn it another half and you're up to 8, and it just locks in. So that's how I'm going to torque the transmission pan, and I'm going to go out and do that now. So here we are back underneath the Corvette to do the final torquing on the bolts there, or screws, and it's going to be 8 foot-pounds. So I've been able to adjust this thing to 8 foot-pounds. This torque wrench makes a tiny noise letting you know that it's torqued up, so you have to really listen for that. It's kind of like a little bump. Like that. And you just go around and tighten them in a kind of crisscross pattern. See if we can hear it click. There we go. That's your 8 pounds right there. Coming around up here. There we go. And I'm going to move over to this one. That's done. Let's try this guy here. That one's done. This guy over here. There we go. That's done. Okay, everything's torqued up. This is on, and hopefully it's gonna work. Keeping my fingers crossed. So you guys, I'm just wrapping this up. If you did have a TH35 or 350 transmission in there, the type of transmission fluid that normally goes in there is an old type of Dextron 2, which they don't make anymore. You can use Dextron 3. That'll work fine. Smooth shifting, apparently. You can also use a Ford F-type, and I've done a lot of reading on that, and it makes the shifting a little bit more grippy. So I'm not really too sure on which one I should use, whether or not I should use the Dextron 3 or the F-type. So if you guys have an idea on what you think is best for this Corvette, put that in the comments and I'll take your advice and make a choice with that. So as it is right now, I don't really care whether or not I put on Dextron 3 or the Type F. So I'm open, doesn't matter to me. Right now I'm kind of leaning towards the Type F, so I don't know. Anyway, something to think about. I'm glad I got it all torqued in though, so we're good to go in that area. Hey everyone, it's Jonathan. Thanks so much for watching the video on the transmission pan removal and replacement, including the gasket and the torque values as well. So I'm in the middle of a spring winter storm here. Hopefully the weather will turn and it'll be spring-like very, very soon here. So thanks a lot for your support. Thanks for sticking around and watching the video, and we'll catch you all in the next one, which is coming very, very soon.